doing a search for provost.
I'm good. Hello? Hello, good morning, almost afternoon. My name is Kathy Ignatoski. I'm part of the Neurodiversity Project. And I'm here to introduce Professor Matt Harrison. Matt is an experienced,
Thank you.
Matt is an experienced teacher, researcher, and digital creator who is an advocate for utilizing technology to support social capacity building, belonging, and inclusion in education. He has taught in Australia, South Korea, and the United Kingdom at primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. Matt is currently a member of the University of Melbourne Faculty of Education Learning Intervention Team. That's a mouthful.
It is. Sorry.
And a project lead at the University of Melbourne Neurodiversity Project, and a co-founder of Next Level Collaboration, the first neurodivergent-led social enterprise to spin out of the University of Melbourne. He was awarded the Dyson Fellowship in 2020 and the Jem Scott Teaching Fellowship, as well as the International Society for Technology and Education Making It Happen Award in 2023. Matt has a lived experience of ADHD, which also informs his passion for inclusive education. Dr. Matt Harrison.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so I better just check that everyone can hear me at the back. Fantastic. I'm looking online. Everyone can hear me online. That's fantastic. My voice is naturally loud. I used to get asked to do the bus announcements when I was a school teacher. So even if I didn't have a microphone, there's probably a good chance that you'd be able to hear me anyway. So that's good. The other thing is, as introduced, I am an ADHD, so I am going to set my timer. Set timer for 40 minutes. That just means that you're out of here by 6 p.m. tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining online as well. I can't see you, but if I do walk out of frame, I am a free-range academic. And my previous time here, I was supported by my wonderful colleagues, Sarah Timperley and Jess Reed, and they're very good at bringing me back to being on camera again. So if I do walk off camera, please feel free to let me know. I do like to wander and chat. Thank you very much for having me today. Today I'm presenting on Design for Difference Built for Belonging. As Kathy introduced, belonging is really something that I really do care about, and it's just been such a wonderful experience coming back to the University of Michigan, a place where I do feel like I belong. You've got a wonderful neurodiversity project here, I'd say, a world-leading neurodiversity project, so I just feel very privileged to be here. Thank you very much. I'm clicking. I might just use the keyboard. We're good. Thank you. Just before I begin, I would like to celebrate 65,000 years of teaching in my home country. First Nations Australians have this wonderfully long tradition of teaching and learning in neuro-inclusive ways. For a long time, unfortunately, my country didn't really ignored and undermined First Nations teaching and learning practices. But luckily, we are now trying to remedy some of the horrible things that happened in the past. So I always do like to acknowledge the fact that I am from, unceded lands, and that my university is built on unceded lands. And that really is something that we're trying to proactively change by remedying some of the things that have happened in the past. I do like to have structure in my presentations, and I'll explain why in a minute. So just so you know what we're going to cover today, I'm going to briefly introduce myself and my personal journey and my team. I am one member of a brilliant team. I'm so lucky, the people I get to work with every day. The reason I get out of bed in the morning, I've got such a great team around me, both my immediate team and my broader University of Melbourne team. I'm going to talk about the University of Melbourne's neurodiversity project. It's quite similar to some of the great things happening here at the University of Michigan. There's things we've learned from Michigan, and hopefully there's things we've been able to share with Michigan that's helped shape the project here. And I'm sure people from other institutions here and online, I'll be able to learn from you as well about some things you're doing that will be really exciting. I'm going to then focus on just 2 projects that we've got that have fallen out of our Neurodiversity Research Collective. The collective is a group of interdisciplinary researchers who sit underneath the Neurodiversity Project that are community facing, looking about how we can do community informed work, research and research translation to hopefully be able to create a more inclusive society. And then I'm going to talk about where we're going to next, the next steps, which is always very exciting. So before I go any further, I'd like just to also acknowledge the wonderful work of my colleague Mel Valance. Mel Valance is a really, saying to Kathy, a really annoying person because she's a really good musician. She's a speech pathologist. She is an autistic advocate who's got a very high profile in my country. And she's also a children's illustrator as well. And what makes things worse is she's actually a really nice person. So she's doesn't have any sort of chinks in the armour. Is pretty much one of those annoyingly good at everything type of people. So I would like to acknowledge Mel's work as well. I think if we do share the slides, there's a QR code. You can go through and see some of her illustrations, but she's done a lot of illustrations for today. This is her illustration of myself, holding my cat, Professor Einstein Cuddlesworth. We like to say that he has tenure in our hearts. Einstein is, you'll see Einstein featured throughout these slides. So my background, I'm a teacher. I've worked right with foundation or at what we call kindergarten, which is absolutely terrifying, right through to year 11s and 12s. And I now work in teacher education. I work around researching and hopefully translating that research to better support teachers, to better support neurodivergent children and young adults. How I got involved in inclusive education in higher education was just because I had a subject called autism. And I had people reaching out from across our faculty saying, hey, I've got an autistic student in our Faculty of Arts or in our Business and Economics program, in our engineering program. We're experiencing some challenges in our program, and since we don't know how to support this person. And it was just sort of that grassroots. And then I was also connecting with I'll explain, other neurodivergent people. I'll tell a story in a minute. And that was really the origins of what we do. So I accidentally became involved in advocating for, hopefully a more inclusive university. I will frame that we've got a long way to go yet at the University of Melbourne. We were a 1 out of 10, I would say, in terms of inclusion. We're now a 6. We've done a lot of things, but we've still got, there's still a lot of things we have to change. So I'm an associate professor there in the Faculty of Education. My research is really the intersection of neurodiversity, inclusive education, and digital technologies. I am a massive nerd. I flagged that in all my presentations. You'll see there's a lot of gaming references throughout this presentation. I'm lucky enough to have co-founded something called Next Level Collaboration with the amazing Jess Rawlings. We ran this as a research living lab, and now we've actually started a social enterprise where we hire neurodivergent young adults and often give them their first jobs. And it's the idea of taking our research to community, and we'll talk about that today as well. And then I am, as Kathy introduced, the co-leader of our university's neurodiversity project. And I was fortunate enough to be elected to our University Council, which is our overarching governing body, by my colleagues. And on a platform of hopefully removing barriers for our neurodivergent students and staff. And look, we have some courageous conversations sometimes with our university president or vice chancellor and our executive. But it's been such a wonderful learning experience for me to be able to work with the university leadership. And we've seen some really great outcomes. I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 4 years. So if you haven't met Jess and Sarah, I do enjoy this one pretty much. I have to declare, I look at photos from when we first started, I have definitely aged the least gracefully out of everyone. Jess and Sarah are amazing researchers. Jess led our student needs analysis work that I'll refer to here. She has done amazing things since then with that student-facing work. And Dr. Sarah Timperley has led our staff needs work. You may have met, if you were here a couple of years ago, you may have met them. They make sure that they are very, very talented at what they do, and I'm very lucky to work with them. And we also have Dr. Erin Hoare, who's joined our team, Associate Professor. Erin is another person who's annoyingly talented, is a professional athlete, or was a professional athlete. She was drafted first overall in the Australian Football League. She's 6'4", which is fantastic for reaching those mugs I can't get in my office on the top shelf. She did a postdoc at Cambridge. She looks at neurodiversity, well-being, and mental health. She's an amazing quantitative researcher, and she's, again, a really, really wonderful person to work with. So the four of us are running the Neurodiversity Project with the support of a lot of other colleagues. So the reason this really matters to me is on a couple of levels. One is that as a neurodivergent person myself, I see a lot of our undergrads coming in, and even some of our graduates, I see myself in them and some of the struggles. I was saying to Sandy earlier today, I wasn't a great high school student. I actually failed one of my year 11 exams, completely destroyed my self-confidence. I was rebuilt by the hard work and just my luck that I had excellent teachers the following year who helped me to be able to get that confidence back again. And I wouldn't be here without them, so I'm always internally grateful. Went to university after that year 12, and then I failed my first year university and realised that my brain just does things a bit differently from other people. And then I see young people going through those same cycles of frustration, then a bit of success and frustration again. And it's trying to make sure that environmentally, in the systems in which we have, that they're conducive to actually removing those barriers and being an advocate for them and my neurodivergent fellow staff colleagues to make sure we have a better higher education system, both at my home institution and around the world. As a school teacher as well, I really see an element of my academic role of pastoral care. I kept getting told earlier on in my career that these aren't school children, they're adults. You don't need to spend so much time with them, but I see a core part of what we do is we're in privileged positions to be able to remove barriers for young people and people across the lifespan. People who just haven't had a shot before, opening doors for them, it's a key part of our role as far as I understand it. So we were here 2024, and it was just amazing to be able to be here and present at the Beautiful Minds Conference. I think it was the first one. Yeah, the first Beautiful Minds Conference. Has everyone here attended the Beautiful Minds Conference before? Yeah, wonderful to see. I'll check online if we can see people being online as well. If you want to put in the chat, that'd be wonderful. But it is one of those things, it was an amazing experience. And what we've realised from that experience and connecting with other institutions is I thought the University of Melbourne was unique in some ways of these challenges, but it's global. It crosses lines. I was saying to Sandy earlier today, it's this amazing thing where you can feel more at home in the USA or China or the USA or the UK working with other neurodiversity projects than in your own institution. You can find more similarities with groups doing this work overseas than you can in your own country. And that's one of the most amazing things about this body of work. It's global, it crosses cultural boundaries, it's built around this common understanding that the world should be better for neurodivergent people, and it needs to be better if we're going to be able to solve these complex problems we have as a global human race. So I really have a real special affinity for the University of Michigan and the work they're doing. I've clicked off again. There we go. We're talking about belonging. People ask me what definition I like to use about belonging, what makes me feel like I belong to the University of Michigan or to other places that I'm lucky enough to visit. And this definition that talks about a sense of belonging, the need to form and maintain at least a minimum number of interpersonal relationships based on trust, acceptance, love and support. Those are human things that every human needs. This is the OECD's definition. It's not non-controversial. There are some valid critiques of it. But I like the idea that as humans, neurotypical, neurodivergent, these are things that everyone needs. And it's how we create systems that allow these things to be able to happen. People be able to form those relationships. just flashing my nerd credentials again. I'm also a child of the 80s and 90s. Pokemon Snap. Did we have any Nintendo 64 players here? Yeah, I can see some hands going up. Feel free, as we go today, I have got QR codes for you. Feel free to pull out your phone if you're at home. It'll take you to the papers. Rather than me talking through papers with you, that way you'll be able to collate a list. You can go away and read anything that's interesting to you later on. So I do not care if you pull out your phone. It's absolutely wonderful if you do. So when we talk about the Neurodiversity Project and what we mean by this, it's really interesting because there's a common understanding of neurodiversity that is forming. There's consensus around the world. We talk about the idea that we're repositioning neurological differences as identities and natural part of human variation. So moving away from deficits to differences. And we're moving away, this is really important, from cure. I like to think, and you may not agree, and that's fine, that I'd be more boring if I didn't have my ADHD, I think. There are some really real challenges. Like I get up super early, I take lots of loving, tender medication. It helps me to be able to get through my day. And there are still things that I find really, really hard. The finance team at my university is incredibly patient with my overdue credit card reconciliations. If the University of Melbourne finance team is watching this recording, apologies, I do owe you some receipts. There are things I find really hard. In my mind, it's not a superpower. It does present real challenges. But I wouldn't be me without it. And even if there was a cure for my ADHD, I don't think I'd want it. I don't think there ever will be, but I don't think I'd want it. The medication does help, but I think it's inherently part of who I am as well. So we're talking about neurodiversity, includes everyone. It's this idea that there is this natural human variation. We are a neurodiverse human race. And it's also a socio-cultural movement, and this is the bit that really excites me. It's the idea of saying we can do better, and we need to do better for future generations. And this is why I think everyone in this room gets out of bed, probably not for themselves, but it's to be able to make sure that we leave this, this world in a better place than we found it. So just, you hear me talk about neurotypical, that just refers to the people who fall within typical societal norms. There's a whole lot of really great critical discourse around that right now. But I'll talk about neurotypical as people who don't identify as neurodivergent. Neurodivergence, that 10 to 20%. The reason it's such a broad range is that we have still have really poor screening, particularly for girls, women, people non-binary. We have really poor assessment data from a whole lot of historically marginalised populations. First Nations Australians are woefully under supported in this space. And there's also a lot of people who just don't want to get diagnosed because they don't want it to be used against them, frankly, for really good reasons, historically and current. And when I talk about neurotypes, I'm talking about labels of neurodivergence or labels that are typically used like autism, ADHD, or ADHD, which is a combined profile. But these are really, I see these labels as door handles to begin to understand how someone might experience the world and what someone might need. But we know there's such huge variation and there's always intersecting factors that we still need to have a person-centered approach to understand their strengths, interests, areas of needs, and what they want at the end of the day. So here are some labels from the University of Melbourne. We asked people to, in our staff and student needs analysis, to share what labels they use. You can see it's quite a diverse range. We don't say to people that you're in or out. Mental health is a really space that's being explored. People with lifelong mental health differences or people with acquired neurodivergence. We have had, in my institution, people who have had horrendous experiences of war and have come to Australia as refugees, seeking safety and escape. Unfortunately, a lot of those populations have been marginalised and been treated quite unfairly in media and in society more general. But people have seen stuff. Young kids that I work with, present as if they have the characteristic of autism, but we think it could be trauma. We don't know. So we focus on what does this individual need right now. We're saying we've had Australian returned veterans from overseas conflicts who've seen things, have had experiences that have been quite traumatic. Same thing. We understand there's left a lifelong change in the way that the brains are processing information. So talk about origins of neurodiversity. It has been until very recently ascribed to someone called Judy Singer, who's an Australian sociologist. We actually know now, there's a great article here about the origins. It actually came up in the early days of the internet. I am of a certain age, so I remember dial-up internet. I remember my parents yelling at me. So the phone was unplugged, so I pick it up and it sounds like they're underwater, trying to make a phone call, and like, oh, Matt's on the internet again. Bulletin boards, and it was global. There were people around the world who did this work. And it was originally mostly autistic people who found each other online in the safety of these online forums and connecting and starting to share these stories. And they started to find out all these amazing things about each other. And in my mind, the neurodiversity movement is not actually that different from some of the early work about autistic women. Lorna Wing was a mother of an autistic girl, and she was saying that she found nothing in the medical literature about autistic women at all. And it was only her daughter's experience going door to door and finding all these hidden autistic women, just through networking. And the bulletin boards of the 90s, a bit like Lorna Wing did in the 70s, is that sort of just finding each other and holding out for hope that there's a better way to do things. And so this article here reflects that story of how our neurodiversity movement really started. I also will use identity first language today. That's just my preference and preference of quite a few of my colleagues. I know there's a divergence of views here today. When I say identity first, if you're not familiar, I refer to myself as an ADHDer. It's inherently part of who I am. Sometimes I'll say, I have ADHD. But I know particularly from my autistic colleagues who are, openly autistic, like Jess and Sarah, my colleagues, they will say, I'm an autistic woman, and is inherently part of who I am. I cannot remove that from myself. So that's the language that I typically use. I do have parents who really want to use person-first language, saying, this is Matt. He supports the Melbourne Football Club, and he's also has ADHD. I understand there's arguments for both sides. And so at the end of the day, as a teacher and educator, I always ask people who are aware of their diagnosis or their label, how would you like me to refer to your autism or your ADHD? How would you like me to talk about it? And just ask them what their preference is. Just to give you a bit of a history, if you're not familiar with the Neurodiversity Project, I introduced it earlier, but we actually in one faculty built, my faculty got some funding, we built a low impact sensory space, and it took about a year to get it all together and get the architects in. We co-designed it. We were really excited, and then we actually launched it in January 2020. And then it sat unused for 2 years because Melbourne went into the longest lockdowns in the world, or some of the longest lockdowns. And then we had our launch. We came back in 2022, we had our launch party, dusted things off a bit, and it was exciting. And a comment by a colleague stuck with me. She is an autistic professor, someone who's been a mentor and role model for me. And she said to me, oh, great, now there's one space that I can use in this building. And I was like, that's a really good point. We've sort of fitted out one room and co-designed that. But what about all the other rooms that have this intense lighting, open planned offices? We actually need to do some research around how people are experiencing their environment. Quite naively, we thought, I think it's pretty good. Sarah and Jess and I led that work, and it was actually, the data was horrific because we put posters up and it was anonymous, and then I had people coming to me who wanted to actually not just be surveyed but be interviewed about their experiences. There's people who I'd worked with for 8 years by that time. They'd never felt safe to tell anyone that they're autistic, and they wanted to be part of this study, and their experiences and their stories actually really shocked me. And at the same time, my university was getting a lot of complaints. We actually ended up on the front page of one of our newspapers for the wrong reasons in terms of our disability equity supports not meeting our legislative responsibilities, and that's a pretty low bar. And so at that time, it was actually Jess Reed and my colleague who said we should write to the Vice-Chancellor and say, we need something to get all of us together and to be able to lead this work. Rather than people telling us what we as a community need, we need to tell them what needs to change to be able to avoid, to just meet the bare minimum of our disability standards for education requirements, but also for our staff. So I felt like this is a place that they could actually, keep working, in which they could keep working. And that was a really important moment because our Vice Chancellor took a risk and he said yes. And he funded Jess and Sarah in the end for 3 years to be able to do this work. And it was an amazing experience what we were able to do through the project. It was an opportunity for us to be able to bring together across our institution that 10 to 20% of people that should be there. And it's people that I'd known for years in different ways who came, and they weren't just themselves having a direct lived experience. They were parents or caregivers. They had, they were supporters for family members, and they really understood why what we were doing as an institution was so problematic, and also the opportunity for us to be able to change. And that was really exciting to have your president or the head of your institution see that value. And that was Duncan Maskell. He's from the UK. We had never met him before, and he was a real passionate supporter. We didn't get universal support. People thought we should go through subcommittees rather than going straight to the Vice Chancellor. But when you've got your president backing you and your provost, that really matters. And that's a sign. And it was recognised as a big step forward for us to have our senior leadership be able to push us. So just to give you some stats, I joke. I'm a child of the 90s, X-Files. I was raised by X-Files. Want to go to New Jersey one day to see the Jersey Devil. It's kind of one of those things. One of the best episodes of the X-Files. But we say the neurodivergents are out there. We're here. We're there. We're not telling you we're here. On our staff survey, out of our 400 staff, only 400 something staff, only 50%, or just less than, had actually disclosed to the line manager that they were neurodivergent. When we asked why not, and this is what Sarah shared at the Beautiful Minds conference a couple of years ago, it was things like fear of not being believed, fear of it being used as an excuse, thought it'd be held against you for promotion or when your contract's up if you're not tenured. If you're a professional staff member, the idea that maybe you shouldn't be managing a group of people if you're autistic. All those sort of stereotypes. So people, with good reason, were not doing it. Our students, we had only 64% had disclosed to one other person, anyone, another student even. So that was really alarming that 36% had told not a single soul that they were neurodivergent, much less an academic or a student support officer or getting an individual plan, a student support plan. It was just telling a friend or a peer that they were autistic or dyslexic or had dyscalculia or bipolar or whatever label they were aligning with. And there was some really good reasons for that as well. Same sorts of reasons. Thought they'd be denied opportunities, thought that they wouldn't be believed, thought they wouldn't be allowed to go on placement, thought that, whole lots of really, really good reasons. And so we wanted to change that data. And the first part of that is to actually share that data. And that's what we did over the 2 years. And part of that, and I'm going to stand over here, I hope I'm still on camera, and I'm going to use the fun. Oh, here we go. This is fun. Some of the stuff we got to do was having the inaugural research symposium, partly inspired by our time at Beautiful Minds to say we need to Beautiful Minds. Beautiful Minds Down Under. There's a research symposium where we had researchers who were either neurodivergent themselves, sharing their research about anything, or researchers within the institution who were specifically doing research around neurodivergence and neurodiversity and inclusion. And that we had some amazing presentations. The Vice Chancellor came and opened that, and that was amazing to have that visible support because the Vice Chancellor always has an entourage going with him, and we knew that the entourage are the people who would allow us to actually be able to open doors and get in places and say, hey, we need to look at the way we're doing extensions across the institution. We need to talk about how we're doing discrimination reports. We need to find a better way of doing this because people don't trust the system. We need to talk about how we're communicating information to staff and students about upcoming events or workplace negotiations. It was all these little different things we've been able to influence because we had our Vice Chancellor behind us. We had the workshops, sharing the information and telling people about what the data said, how the data was presenting, what we needed to do from the voices of our neurodivergent staff and students. And that was amazing. And the idea of doing curriculum co-design. And the idea is, we didn't invent all of this stuff. We borrowed it from other institutions like Lawrence Fung's curriculum co-design projects at Stanford University. We went and visited Lawrence's team and we learned, right, we need to do some curriculum co-design. We need to get our students to actually come in with us and say, we need a new assessment task. Here's what we're thinking. Here's the outcomes we want. What could we do that would make this a more neuro-inclusive activity? That was really cool. We led this, we helped to be able to inform the review of our student equity and disability services. That was a massive body of work. I'm proud that our institution doubled the amount of funding going to our student equity and disability services. That was a really key part. We knew it was underfunded. We had the data showing that, and the fact that we were able to go, I was allowed likely to join the review panel and then join the implementation oversight committee to be able to get into those corridors of change making and leadership is so key. We had of course our actual own research of what we've done, including coming here and learning from other institutions and hopefully sharing what we've learned along the way, and just building up that community. And I'm talking about the higher education network, neurodiversity network now. Two things that I think are really cool that we've been able to do just in terms locally for us is, and this is Dr. Sarah Temple has led this idea of an interdisciplinary breadth subject. And this was you working with the Faculty of Education, the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences, and the Faculty of Engineering. And the idea that any student from across the university in their second year can take an elective breadth subject from any faculty. We created a breadth subject for a subject called Neurodiversity Blueprints for Belonging. And we wanted to use that subject as an example or exemplar of how you could actually implement your universal design for learning. This is not my work. This is Dr. Sarah Timperley, Dr. Jess Lees, and Dr. Rima Katani, who set this work up. They did amazing work in designing this subject, and it was based on some of the ideas that Lawrence did set up. Essentially, it was sharing the data from our student and staff needs analysis, and students working in teams or individually to be able to think through using design thinking how they could better understand that person's experiences, what they want, their priorities and their needs, and then designing possible solutions for them for the university. Changes to policy, changes, supports that we have in place, designing apps, for example, for wayfinding. And it was the idea that this could become an incubator for ideas led by our students to how we could change the culture of I have to say, very conservative traditional institution, University of Melbourne. The other thing is HEN, the Higher Education Neurodiversity Network. There's a QR code here. HEN, I'm lucky we've got University of Michigan represented on HEN as well. It is a network, informal grassroots network. At the moment we run through LinkedIn, but we do have a webpage very soon on the way. It's the idea that we can all share resources together. If you're in teaching staff, if you're doing some tutoring, or if you're a student even, to find ways that we can support each other around the world. We've got, I think we're up to 132 institutions. It's pretty good. So if you'd like to join HEN, everyone's welcome. That's the great thing. But it has been something that is a growing movement, and we're trying to say, rather than everyone having to reinvent the wheel, how can we work more effectively together? So I'm going to talk about two research projects now. The first one is based on the Neurodiversity Project. I'm going to talk about this quite quickly because I'm aware of time. But this was a project that was based around digital inclusion, how we could use digital tools, and how we could position them in a way that's both neurodiversity affirming and aligns with the principles of universal design for learning. So if you're not familiar with universal design for learning, we wanted to remove barriers for all students. This takes you to the CAST website. We have a report you can read later on. I'll flick through this quite quickly. But the main things is we wanted to understand how digital technology is being used in inclusive classrooms. We looked at schools, but what we found, we think will actually translate or transfer, transport even, to higher education in many cases. So we wanted to understand both academic and social inclusion. That's the thing. How do we make people feel like they're socially included? And that's a key part to that belonging question that we're focusing on today. So we had a series of research questions. We'll share the slides, but the main things we really wanted to understand is how do we create those conditions for engagement, representation, action, expression. Those are, if you look at the CAST guidelines, those three overarching domains within Universal Design for Learning. And we think those are the three things that will make the biggest difference for our students in both academic inclusion, across the lifespan, and in social inclusion too. So we first started with a rapid literature review, and then we did case studies of 6 classrooms, 3 in elementary school and 3 in secondary. And then we completed interviews with teachers. As part of those case studies, our students and school leaders, and we actually observed about 19 different classroom lessons with our own observations as well. The idea is we saw the rapid literature review, there were massive gaps in the literature, and we wanted to fill those in by actually going into classrooms by teachers who nominated it as being aspirationally inclusive. They didn't say they were perfect, but they wanted to let us come in, talk to them, understand their thinking, and see how they were teaching, see how their students were engaging in the learning experiences, and then talk to the young people themselves. Amazing responses from the young people. They're very honest, which is fantastic. And then talking to school leaders about the policy level considerations too, because a lot of the policy barriers that Australian school teachers are experiencing are the same that higher education teachers are experiencing as well. So in the literature review, there's really 2 things. There was actually how the technology was being used, and then there was those trends in research and practice, what we actually saw when we looked at the types of research being done. So we went through a whole process through identifying literature. We came out with 34 articles in the end from our initial start of 2,578. We came out with 34 that met actually addressed what we're looking for. And some of the results were pretty alarming. I'll share those results with you now in the types of research that were being done. So in terms of the actual technologies, most of the work was around tablet, games and laptops or computers. In terms of what was actually being focused on for including neurodivergent students, curriculum delivery, not a surprise, was the big one. The second one was social skills intervention, and this is actually really problematic because one of the ways these studies were being framed were focusing on how they can make particularly autistic students, also ADHDers, less autistic or less ADHD in their presentation. Are you familiar with the term masking? The idea of, trying to, camouflaging, someone trying to suppress their natural self. It could be through, their queer identity, it could be through their neurodivergence. It's the idea of trying to change people inherently and people having to act as if they're not a certain way. That was the biggest thing. And one of the biggest uses of software we saw was to try to shape behaviour in those ways. When we talked about the degrees to which things were affirming, most of ours, we developed a set of criteria. It's actually in a research paper that I can share with you. You can have a look at that. Most of our papers were fair. We had a sizable proportion, mostly in the social skills that were poor. Very few were actually affirming uses of the technology. Actually allowed for authentic expression of who they were, didn't try to change who they were really focused on changing the child rather than building skills and capacity that could be used with flexibility that allow people to still be themselves. We also found that in terms of social validity measures, half had none. So there's no checking about whether this is something that people actually want. And there was only 20% that had any child voice of all out of those 34 papers we reviewed. What was also really disturbing was we found very, very few studies that actually asked autistic students anything. Dyslexic students much more likely. Some studies looked at for ADHDers, but autistic students never asked, is this actually something you want? Has anyone here, this is a silly question, I'm assuming most people here have seen Jurassic Park. I'm paraphrasing poorly here. It's one of my favourite films. It shaped me a lot growing up. But the idea of, the site, people become preoccupied with whether they can do something or not doesn't mean they stop thinking through the ethical implications, whether they should or not. And a lot of these interventions were very much, and studies were based around, yes, we can do this to these kids. It's like, yeah, but should we be doing this? Wasn't never asked or never considered. And this is up to this day. I still get papers asked for peer review that are saying about we can reduce autistic traits by X% using measures that were developed in the 1980s, the 1970s, that are highly problematic for a whole host of reasons, and they're still coming. Increasing numbers of papers coming to me to review. Case studies, we looked at a whole range of classroom learning activities, but the real keys that we thought, things that I pulled out I thought were most useful for higher education were recommendations around how we can support executive functioning through digital tools and supports. Things like providing digital scaffolds and graphic organisers. I now do this with my higher education. And my average age of my students are 35. We're a graduate school. These are people coming back studying their Masters of Learning Intervention, their masters for experienced teachers looking to move into leadership, giving them graphic organisers and visual scaffolds. We say essential for some, but harmful for none. These are things that help everyone in my mind in my teaching and learning. Things for establishing routines and systems to create clear expectations. Just having that visual activity schedule, and I do this at the start of my classes. Just know, what are we doing today? How long is it going to go for and when we're going to finish? Really key. Creating that safe culture for active participation and constructive feedback. The idea of allowing anonymous comments to come in. Even if you want to have it so you can see the comments, but just so other students, if you're sharing responses on a board, you may be able to see who's on your laptop or your computer, who's sharing, but allowing people to not see each other's comments so people feel safe. They're really anxious in that social environment. Allowing multimodal communication through their phones, things like QR codes, tools like Poll Everywhere, fantastic for actually creating that safety. I have a lot of young people in programs that I run. There's my timer. Who don't feel safe verbalising, but feel safe when there's anonymous comments coming up. I have a lot of 35, 40, 50-year-old teachers the same way, who don't feel safe verbalising a response, but have really important insights to share. They want to share via, and it could be through multimodal, through drawings, it could be through text responses, but they don't want to necessarily have their name attached to that. They don't want that social pressure. So that was our look at UDL. That report I'm very happy I could share with you. You can have a look at all the research recommendations and findings and go through the data and see how we got there. The second thing I was going to share, and I'll share briefly, is next level collaboration. This is the reason, this is the second reason besides the neurodiversity project I get out of bed. This is something that I love. We run, from some research we did in 2015, we actually set up a social enterprise. We run gaming groups for neurodivergent children and young adults, 8 to 15-year-olds. When they turn 16, we try to hire them as their first job often. And because they've been through the program, we run groups, strength-based gaming groups that use team-based games to be able to develop collaboration skills, but more importantly, friendships, social connections, sense of belonging. And this is a wild idea, inviting groups of kids every Tuesday night to come to our Faculty of Education, take the place over. We run it across at the same time across multiple floors every week. Done this for 6 years now. And we have about 17 neurodivergent young adults that we hire. Many are students at our faculty or other faculties. Some are going to our trade school. Some, this is the only thing they do, but they're really engaged and want to come in. And it's been one of those life-affirming things. You go, yeah, the future's okay. These young people are going to solve a lot of the world's problems if we can just keep the world going long enough for them to be able to do that. And so we have a wonderful team around us. So we do a lot of research. My job within that organisation, that social enterprise, is as the Chief Research Officer. So I get to talk about and write about gaming a lot. Just like, I like to point out to my parents, when they told me that video games are a waste of time, I did send them a copy of my thesis And, I did get them each a hoodie as well, so they can wear it around. It's a bit smug, but it is one of those great things in life where I get to do something that I love. And I get to work with people who are really engaged in this space. And we get to do research around virtual playgrounds, which are unstructured gaming spaces, around our digital games-based support programs, and our esports programs as well. If you want to learn more about Next Level Collaboration, you can just type in Next Level Collaboration into Google or .com. You can get our website. But we really focus on this idea of strength-based skills rather than trying to change how kids want to interact. We try to teach skills with flexibility in a way they can choose how they want to perform the skills. So listening to others is a classic example. They can show they're listening to others through direct eye contact, but for some kids, including my family members, they find that really anxiety-inducing. So it could be just giving a thumbs up. It could be through non-verbal communication. It could be through in-game communication. There's lots of different ways. We teach our young people to advocate for how they best can use that skill. So here's some examples of other skills we use. Recognising frustration, sharing task information, finding a compromise. These are transcultural skills. These are things that work in any, they're inherently human skills. There are cultural contexts here for each of these skills. But what we want to do is teach flexibility. So there's not one right way to do these things. And so we design a lot of our programs with our young people now. I've worked with them for years. They're very good at telling me when I've got things wrong. And it's been an absolute privilege to design our programs. We use a design research model called the ComPlay model. We iteratively go through and design different versions of a program. Then we do field testing with our lab every Tuesday night. We get data from that, and then that takes us back to, there we go. There we go. Thank you. That takes us back here to analysis, and we'll take it back to the kids again to try again. So, I'm going to click on the thing. We use a 3-stage structure for most of our programs. We have that skill instruction through modelling and review. We do coaching during play, and we have a guided reflection at the end. I'll share the slides afterwards because I want to make sure people can have some lunch and questions. But we use a lot of video analysis where we actually film the sessions, and then we'll interview the kids as well to get their input, of course. We also show them the video and the video analysis, and we can see which skills they're using, which level of sophistication, what the adults are doing in the room. So you can see when the adult's talking, that's me, all the kids stop interacting, which is not what you want. It's like, be quiet, Matt. And so you can see what's happening in the game world as well, which is really cool. We look at things like the actual target skills. We look at the design of the games. A really tough part of my job is actually testing new games, commercially developed games, and seeing if they do align to the principles that we think create those conditions of collaboration. So it means I do get to put games on my tax return every year, which is always fun. My accountant didn't believe me for the first 2 years. I had to show him the website. Now believes me, which is great. And how we actually can facilitate through skill instruction. I do have a video, but I want to skip that. I'll share it with you later on because I do want to talk, and I'll share this as the data from our evaluation, but I want to talk about where to next and finish on that. So we are at a process, and this is probably like the University of Michigan, we're like, how do we scale this and how do we keep this going? So we're working with our University Advancements team, there's our philanthropic donors, and we're in the process of setting up what's called the Neurodiversity Research Collective. It's the idea that we'll have a lot of funded positions, hopefully through philanthropic donors, for people with direct lived experience or people who have indirect lived experience of being family members or caregivers to come and do research with us, but also for people who want to do short-term projects with us from the community. Have come in and they see something in their world that they want to address. So we're looking to set up this research collective and to be able to fund it for 7 years. And it's really exciting. We've got a program of research that looks at how we actually measure things for neurodivergent people, quality of life. What is that for someone who's autistic or ADHD or dyslexic? All our tools are out of date. We know we need to improve them. So it's how we actually develop the things that count what we think matter. Then programs for how we support innovations in schools, in higher education. How can we have an express speedway innovation, getting ideas from prototypes into actually out for field testing. And the third part we do is evaluation. Going into community and evaluating things that are already there. There are some great things that don't get funding from federal government because they don't have the budget to be able to do a proper research evaluation. So we want to support our neurodivergent community partners to be able, by doing those evaluations for them and getting them the data they need to be able to go for federal government and state government contracts. That's me. I say at the end of the day what really matters, and it's just the fact that I think it's that community. I think for me, I look back on my journey, what really matters and what allows me, it's given me the opportunity to do this, has been the sponsorship from other people. It's more than mentoring, it's a sponsorship. I had Professor Lorraine Graham. If you're watching this recording, sorry for embarrassing you, Lorraine. Lorraine retired this year. He's an amazing academic. Really took me on and gave me opportunities to do things that have got me to this point. And I think it's looking forward, it's for us, it's how we sponsor those next generations coming through. Thank you very much. There are my contact details. Sorry, I was a little bit over with timing. Thank you very much.
Questions?
If you have a long question, that's good. Give me a minute to drink some water. I love a good long question.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison, for the presentation. It's very, very helpful. So I'm John Vasquez. I'm actually Assistant Vice Provost for Student Success here at the University of Michigan. And under my purview this year is we're looking at the first year experience and really trying to center the student's experience and figure out, we know we confuse students, stress them out, they get lots of communication, especially at the University of Michigan where everything is decentralized. And so we've spent this past semester looking at the handoff from like admissions to orientation. So this coming fall, we're going to start looking at, so what are our students' experiences? How can we make this transition both less stressful, but also how do we help students find their community?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to be straightforward and say, as a gay Latino first generation student, like I can wrap my head around what we can do and talk to students, and we're going to have a student subcommittee. But I think neurodiverse students is one of those areas that we want to also include and partner with students to figure this out. But because of everything that you've shared already about stigma and masking, but then also wanting to be inclusive, because I'm struggling with how do we do that at the top level, at the massive scale in this process? So.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important question. So there's a few things to unpack there. The first thing is and this is I can't take credit for this. This was Sarah and Jess, my colleagues. The fact that they're both openly autistic and ADHDers, they put that in all the communication, and our students said, and our staff said, they don't respond to other surveys, but they responded to this one in massive numbers because they had trust that the person running the group, or in our case, the analysis, actually had lived experience, direct lived experience, and could empathise, and there was much more of a trusting starting place. So when you're thinking about your student group, if you have a staff member, and I know it's a big ask, if they want to go out and say, I'm actually autistic, ADHD, or I'm dyslexic, I'm dyscalculia, or having a few staff members there, and I'd probably say across the gender range as well, having that visibility really matters. So important. In my institution, again, extremely conservative. We only had our first female. We've been around for 160 years. We only had our first female vice chancellor last year, which is embarrassing. It was a long, long time coming. Unfortunately, she passed away. She was very unwell, but we know the same thing with neurodivergence. You know, if you can see it, you can be it. But if it's, you know, if you have had bad experiences in the past, on the flip side, where people haven't understood you, there can be a trust deficit there. And I think it's just saying, hey, having a visible person who says, I have walked in your shoes, that's going to be a wonderful starting point for you. I was on the Student Equity and Disability Services review. We got hundreds of submissions, including complaints, like hundreds, if not thousands of submissions from students. And the onboarding for those first year students was critical. We know there's a cliff about 3 to 6 months in. A lot of students drop out because they're coming from highly structured secondary schools, coming, like I was one of these students, coming into, I am now living away from home. I have, 18 is the drinking age in Australia, so I don't have parents and I can go out clubbing on a Thursday night and forget that I have an 8 a.m. Commercial law class on Friday morning. So it's the lack of structure and lack of routine and the overwhelm of not knowing where to go and ask for help is really key. We also know it's intersectional with the equity issues co-occurring with other factors that say people experience barriers on many levels. We know that. So we started a proactive outreach program, which early data seems to indicate this is going to work quite well. Is if a student self-nominates that they have an individual education plan, that there'll be an outreach saying, hi, I'm Matt from Student Equity Disability Support Services. We just noticed that you ticked that you had an individual education plan in year 12. No one else needs to know about this, but I just want to let you know that we have these things called academic adjustment plans. You want to come in for a chat before you even start. You can bring a support person, you can bring your parents. We can tell you, rather than you having to Google, what we can offer. We can communicate in terms of support, and these are the possible pathways for you. And I'm going to follow up with you in a week when you've had a chance to think about it, and I'll put them on the spot and say, do you want to, do you want to get an academic adjustment plan? And I'll help you go through that process, and sort of like a concierge almost to take you through that process. And that outreach, and a lot of our student equity disability services providers are openly neurodivergent themselves. That's key. They often say, hey, just letting you know, when they share their story, so if they say I'm autistic, say, just letting you know I'm autistic as well. I understand where you're coming from. That empathy just makes people feel like they actually belong there and welcome. And having also peer mentoring groups as well in first year. We have like second or third year, fourth year students who are actually autistic, dyslexic, dyscalculic. Having groups around neurotypes can be really helpful. We have ADHD study groups now. We didn't have these things 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. Sorry.
I have one back here.
And so that might also be a great pathway.
For our online group.
So I was just saying that one of our students has just started a Neurodiversity Alliance, and that might be a great pathway for you to connect. They are already building trust throughout the community and have had a large number of students signing up. So I would say leverage the resource groups that are already available, as well as the employee resource groups. There's also a number of employee resource groups that are also tackling the same discussion items, and so thinking of how you broaden those relationships. So happy to connect with them.
Hi, I teach in the community college system, and so I have a lot of students who start at community college because they do find, going to a four-year university overwhelming or inaccessible due to finances, preparation, things like that. Do you have any suggestions for in-class activities that you find are most engaging to help students connect with college learning?
And is that, sorry, just to clarify, is that connecting around academic learning outcomes or social connection or either?
Either.
Yeah. Affinity spaces have been really popular I know, and we have our TAFEs, which I think are like your community colleges. like the technical schools for like trades? Is that like community college?
So here in community colleges, you might know them as junior colleges. They're usually introductory level classes for every field with some specialization in trade, but a lot of it is preparing students on the introductory level to move on to four-year universities to complete degrees in everything from med school to engineering to the social sciences. And so, for example, I teach anthropology. So I teach introduction to physical, cultural, social, academic, applied, and linguistics.
You're going to laugh. We don't have the equivalent of this in Australia, but I've seen the show Community, so I know exactly what you're talking about. That's good. So I just clicked. I was like, yeah, I've seen Community. I know what this is. Yeah, so in terms of those welcome activities, affinity spaces have been really popular. And that's the idea of having something that is, particularly for autistic students, like Lego Club or something like that, or gaming club. All those things have the purpose of bringing down social tension because you've got a task to do, if that makes sense, often around something that's a strength or an interest. Gaming is a great one because if you're doing shared gaming in a physical space, you've got one TV, a PlayStation or a Switch, and 4 controllers. You don't have to make direct eye contact. You're looking at the screen, you're doing something. So having those affinity spaces, we had a similar issue around that social engagement, and that was leading to academic disengagement with a lot of our international students who were coming from mainland China, because it just felt very isolated and we weren't very good at creating opportunities for social engagement if it wasn't around the work. So we used to come in, we made an effort to come in 30 minutes before class and we'll do Mario Kart, something like that, and just get to know you. And it just reduced a lot of the social barriers. And then actually, in class time, they'd have an existing relationship with someone they've been playing with before, and it helped to actually create those conversations. And so if you could leverage that into study groups from those relationships, I think that would help a lot with that that engagement as well. Does that make sense? Craft groups have been really popular as well at the University of Melbourne, like cross-stitch and things like that, because again, you've got something you're doing as a group, and you're not having to make direct contact. You've got something to talk about as well. Yeah, hope that helps.
Hi, I'm Dennis. I'm an engineering lecturer at U of M, and I firstly want to appreciate the kind of reframing of deficiencies to differences, because in the engineering realm, in a nutshell, we like to fix deficiencies, but deficiencies has this negative connotation, and that really resonates heavily with me in an engineering context of not fixing deficiencies, but rather making a difference. And on that note, the kind of context that I teach engineering in is highly collaborative. All of the students that are within the space work in teams, and what I have noticed is a lot of the mismanagement within those teams stems from differences within locally within each team member. And a lot of those things stem towards neurodivergent need differences versus neurotypical needs, and there being frustration between the two sides of the spectrum. So in kind of the theme of belonging, what are some techniques that you could think of that could potentially foster that sense of belonging in a highly technical discipline like engineering, and fostering belonging to make it a little bit more of a interpersonal relationship rather than a technical relationship?
I have spent a lot of time with our Faculty of Engineering and IT working through some of these challenges. There's one thing that's very radical that's being considered right now, that's a system-wide thing that would be across the university, but particularly driven by experiences that you're describing. And then there's small things you can do. The radical thing is looking at across the university, and this has been proposed and is being seriously considered, of first year, because a lot of the assignments in our engineering is also, same methodology, very collaborative. Getting rid of grades for first year and just making it pass-fail. And the idea is the first year is about capacity building and understanding about how you can teach the collaboration skills in a lower stakes environment. A lot of our students, probably like Michigan, have worked their backsides off to come to the University of Melbourne, where I think it's a problematic measure, but we are ranked number 1 in Australia in terms of university. I was always told growing up, this is where you want to go. My parents were, highly encouraging me to go. It's one of those things where our students get there and they're like, I still want to get the best grades. So I want to do a master's, I want to do a PhD, or I want to, I'm worried about my employer seeing my transcript. And so we do things, having that first year, and we haven't done this yet, but consider making that first year about capacity building around how you actually talk about negotiation in a group. The issue is in our school curriculum, we talk about assessing this, but most teachers don't actually teach what do we mean by collaboration. We're not explicitly teaching those skills, but also if we do, we're teaching it in a neurotypically normed way. We're not teaching that skill flexibility. And that's just an oversight that we haven't, we've talked about, okay, this is what teamwork looks like, and there's one way of doing it. We're in a multicultural society in Australia, like the US. You've got different cultural lenses, not just neurodivergence. And so ways of making meaning and ways of coming to consensus can be very different. And that's where we also see a lot of clash. It's not just, it's a triple empathy problem because there's a cultural lens, there's a neurodivergence lens, and then there's also that discipline lens as well of the engineering field. You've got novices coming in and being asked to think like experts in the field. And it takes time to develop those. That's why, so that radical idea is to buy people a year, take the pressure off saying, you're just getting pass or fail. It doesn't matter if you get top grade or not, it's not going to be on your transcript, and that you actually spend time with actually enjoy the journey rather than focus on the destination, if that makes sense. The second, the less radical part of that is a lot of actual explicit teaching around this. It's like we do with Next Level with the gaming groups. It's saying, right, so these are the different strategies you can use to resolve and negotiate something, resolve differences. You're going to have this throughout your life. I work with some adults who've been in the workforce for 50 years, and they struggle with negotiation. Some of my very senior colleagues are used to getting their own way, and so you tell them, actually, you can't flunk a student for that because they got an AAP. And they're like, why? And it's like, well, no, you can't do it. It's against the law. But you kind of, it's one of those things where we model this as lifelong ongoing learning. So it's saying it's not condescending. It's saying let's actually unpack this construct of collaboration. What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? And getting your first year students in particular on the same page around that. What are processes in the workplace that you can apply now, methodologies to resolve conflict or to resolve, when you've got misaligned goals? How can you, I think that's a key part of curriculum in any area. I was a digital technologies teacher, so I know the software engineering side a little bit, and we get called in all the time to help with these kind of issues. So I hope that's helpful. But if you want to change your program, I'd love to come and see a pass-fail first year.
Love that too.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, I have a question in the chat.
Online, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so it says, I work with students 25 and up,
Yep.
and who may not have been diagnosed, but may just be discovering or becoming uncomfortable, being openly neurodivergent. I'm wondering if you have any advice to help them.
Yeah, we have this a lot. As I said, it's only 64% had told anyone. It's a really good question. Thank you, online person. PF, thank you. It was, we talk about needs. So saying, can you tell me a little bit about, tell me about how what do you see as your areas of need? And often it's in the context of having not done very well on an assignment, or there's been an issue in a group work scenario or something like that, and saying, what do you need to succeed? And to understand them. So you can talk about differences in social communication and interaction without talking about autism. because it could be a whole lot of different things. It could be a cultural lens, it could be, it's differences. It's not saying it's your fault. It's just saying that, hey, this is how you view the world, this is how I view the world. I worked in South Korea for 2 years, and there was differences, and, you know, I had to adjust. Coming back to the software engineering side, I often say I'm a Mac in a PC world. I'm running a different operating system. It's not better or worse, it's just different, and I need to change for a PC world, but also, you know, I can't try to run Windows software on my Mac. If I'm trying to do things in a way that just don't work for me, it's not going to work. So it's how can we exchange files between a Mac and a PC and make sure that things are working on both systems. I hope that makes sense.
We have time for one more question. Chris?
I know there's going to be like an entire separate, probably meeting and council. How do we go about changing the other side? How do we, so I guess the question is how can we start the conversation with the other half? Say the neurotypical people. We clearly have people here who are passionate from the one side and are working for developing and learning to work within society, being, say, neurodivergent. But how do we bring the other people to the table so that they can learn how to interact with somebody who is neurodivergent?
As a, returning to the Mac Windows user, as a Mac user, I understand that being a Mac user, I can be very annoying to my Windows colleagues when I try to give them a Keynote file rather than a PowerPoint file that won't run on their on their system. Or, you know, they get sick of hearing about Mac and about why I prefer using a Mac. And I think the analogy works here as well. If you're being used to doing something a certain way for a long time, and this is change, right? This is for anything. It happens in Australia with how we work with, you know, cultural diversity, celebrating First Nations peoples, and it asks us to change what we're doing. And it's the same for neurodivergence. So I understand it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in this landscape where people are stressed, time poor, they're getting asked to do more and more administration, and so now asking them to do something else different. So the conversation I have is about A, it's the right thing to do. B, is we have a law around this for good reason. We have legislations, you know, in Australia for a long time around this. And the third thing is actually, we say essential for some, harmful for them. This will actually help everyone. And to say how short-term changes in processes will actually make life better for everyone. That's the universal part of universal design. Quick example, emails. Used to get absolute floods of text. My ADHD brain cannot process that. So actually having a system and a format for our faculty emails where it's like background information, ... Request, what I'm actually asking you to do. Request, timeline as a standard. Having that actually benefits everyone because you're not reading this huge essay from our dean. If you're watching, I love you very much. But, you know, we did change the email format. We do see that as very interesting in the sense that you do get that, you know, we see the fact that people often say after the changes occurred, oh, that was good, that wasn't too hard at all. It's just the initial jumping off point. And it's making it really clear the why and the how and the benefits.
Well, is this on? Yeah. Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left because we have to go over to Ruthven. But if you have questions for Matt, I'm sure he can stay for like another 3 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to the online people as well.